The air in the courtroom was so thick with silence, you could feel the weight of it. Across from me sat my stepbrother, Mark, the family's charming mistake-maker, wearing a smirk he probably practiced in the mirror. He thought this was just another family drama he could talk his way out of. But then the judge, a stern man who looked like he'd seen everything, looked up from the thick, officially bound report on his desk. His gaze landed on Mark, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. His voice was ice. "Mr. Jensen," he said, "this report from the diplomatic security service paints a very different picture of your family squabble. It seems your stepsister isn't just a dramatic data entry clerk." The judge leaned into his microphone, his expression hardening into something truly intimidating. "It says here her official title is Senior Threat Analyst, with a Level 4 security clearance. And at 2:05 hours, she activated a duress protocol I've only read about in federal manuals." Mark's smirk didn't just fade. It was wiped clean from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed confusion. In that moment, a quiet, cold certainty settled in me. This was a language of consequence they couldn't ignore. 2 weeks earlier, the silence had been broken only by the sound of their laughter. It was 2 a.m. in the kitchen, and I was trying to de-escalate one of Mark's drunken tirades over something utterly meaningless. From the living room, I could hear my mother, Sandra, a woman who treated peace like a fragile vase that must never be disturbed, and my stepfather, Gary. They weren't intervening. They were enjoying the show. As I tried to calm him down, my mother's voice floated in, laced with that familiar, weary amusement. "Oh, let him be, Raina. You know how you get him worked up. You're so dramatic." Those 3 words hit me harder than a slap. It was the same tone she used when I graduated with honors, the same dismissal I received when I tried to explain what I actually did for a living. Before I could process the sting, Mark lunged. He had grabbed a screwdriver from a toolbox left on the counter. A sharp, searing pain exploded in my shoulder, white-hot and immediate. I stumbled back, my hand coming away slick and warm with blood. Through the ringing in my ears and the tunneling of my vision, I could still hear them. Chuckling. My body was trembling, from shock or blood loss, I didn't know. But my mind was strangely clear. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling on the screen. I sent a 3-letter text to a single unlisted number. SOS. It wasn't a cry for help to a friend. It was an activation, a signal. Then, everything went dark. They thought I was texting a friend for sympathy. They had no idea I had just triggered a system designed to protect federal assets under threat on foreign soil. To understand the reckoning that was now unfolding in that courtroom, you have to understand the 2 lives I was living. To my family, my life was a beige file folder, something to be tucked away and forgotten. I was the quiet background noise to the main event, my stepbrother Mark. I remember one Sunday barbecue, the air thick with the smell of charcoal and cheap beer. Mark was holding court, bragging about being promoted to assistant sales manager at the car dealership. My stepfather, Gary, a man who saw Mark as a second chance at his own faded ambitions, slapped him on the back, beaming with a pride I had never once seen directed at me. The whole family cheered. It was like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. Later, I tried to share a small victory of my own. I mentioned to Gary that I had just completed a 6-month certification course. For work, a grueling program that less than 10% of applicants pass. He gave me a distracted pat on the head, his eyes already scanning the yard for Mark. "That's nice, sweetie," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You stick with that little government job. It's safe." Safe. To them, my career was the equivalent of shuffling papers at the DMV, a boring, stable, and utterly insignificant job they could comfortably ignore. They didn't have the imagination for anything else. That quiet dismissal was a language I was fluent in. It was present in every condescending smile from my mother, Sandra, a woman who prized the flawless image of her new family above all else. Years earlier, when I tried to explain my career aspirations, she had cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Raina, please," she'd sighed. "Your stepfather provides for us. Mark needs our support. He's sensitive. Don't make things complicated with all your ambition." My ambition was an inconvenience, a smudge on her perfect family portrait. So I stopped trying. I let them believe I was just a cog in some vast, boring bureaucracy. It was easier than explaining the truth, that my world was anything but safe. While they were celebrating a minor promotion, my reality was a soundproof, windowless room known as a skiff, a place where the silence is so absolute you can hear your own heartbeat. There. I wasn't Sweetie. I was the lead analyst. Just days before that barbecue, I stood before my superior, Director Evans, a man whose steely gaze could make colonels sweat, and delivered a threat assessment. The lives of an ambassador and his entire staff depended on my analysis. I spoke a language my family would never understand, a language of protocols and probabilities. "The asset is reporting heightened chatter on encrypted channels," I stated, my voice calm and steady as I pointed to a specific node on a digital map. "The traffic pattern is consistent with pre-attack surveillance. I'm recommending we elevate the security posture to Delta immediately." I paused, taking a breath. "The algorithm flags a 92% probability of an imminent hostile action within the next 40 to 8 hours. There was no emotion in my voice. Only data. Only facts. Director Evans listened without interruption. His eyes locked on the screen, processing every word. He didn't pat my head or call my work nice. He just looked at me, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of my words passing between us. Then, he gave a single, sharp nod. "Execute," he commanded. "Your analysis has never been wrong. In that world, my ambition wasn't an inconvenience. It was a shield that protected people. My quiet, focused nature wasn't a personality flaw. It was a critical asset that allowed me to see the patterns no one else could. I lived a life of immense consequence and quiet competence, earning the respect of people who held the fate of nations in their hands. Then, I would go home for the holidays, and I would be the boring daughter with the safe little government job again. The invisible girl. I existed in two separate universes, and the whiplash between them was a constant, private burden. One life was a cacophony of undeserved praise for the smallest of achievements, and the other was a silent world of earned respect for the highest of stakes. I never tried to bridge the two. I knew it was impossible. For years, I'd been trying to earn their respect. After I woke up in that hospital bed with stitches in my shoulder, and their laughter still ringing in my ears, I realized I had been using the wrong rulebook. So I decided to use mine. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of my mother's practiced, gentle voice. She was sitting by my hospital bed, my stepfather hovering behind her. "Oh, thank goodness you're awake," she cooed, her face a mask of concern. "You gave us such a scare." "You must have tripped and fallen on the toolbox, honey. Mark feels just terrible about it." I stared at her, the memory of the screwdriver, of their laughter, cutting through the fog of pain medication. They were already rewriting history, smoothing over the jagged edges of what really happened to protect him, to protect their perfect, peaceful life. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt nothing at all. There was no point in arguing, in pleading my case with people who had already decided on their verdict. I simply nodded, my gaze flat and empty. When they left, promising to bring me some clothes, I picked up the phone. But I didn't call the police. I called a number that bypassed local precincts entirely, my agency's internal affairs division. My voice was steady, devoid of emotion. "This is analyst Raina Jansen," I said. I am reporting an assault on a federal employee and the activation of a duress protocol. This was no longer about family. It was about procedure. The next day, I was visited by a woman from the agency's legal counsel. Her name was Anna, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer with eyes that seemed to see right through any lie. She wasn't there to offer sympathy. She was there to execute a strategy. She explained that my SOS text wasn't just a message. It was a digital flare that automatically generated a high-priority, time-stamped incident report, logged my precise coordinates, and dispatched a federal wellness check team. The ones who had found me bleeding on the floor and called 911. That report, she told me, was a sealed, official document. Our strategy was simple. We would introduce it in court and let the facts speak for themselves. While I was recovering, my family was preparing for a different kind of battle. They hired a cheap local lawyer, the kind you see on daytime television ads. They were gearing up for a messy family drama, ready to paint me as unstable, vindictive, and attention-seeking. They would use my quiet nature against me, twisting it into proof of my supposed fragility. They collected stories of my ambition and my dramatic tendencies, preparing to assassinate my character. They were bringing a knife to a gunfight, and they didn't even know it. While they prepared their insults, Anna and I were preparing subpoenas for 911 call. Logs and paramedic reports, evidence that would perfectly corroborate every line in my official file. My family arrived in court, armed with anecdotes and insults, ready to put me on trial. They had no idea I was coming armed with the United States government. They thought they were entering a family dispute. In reality, they had just walked into a federal debriefing. The courtroom was exactly as drab and impersonal as I'd imagined. All beige walls and worn wooden benches. I sat beside Anna, my back straight, my expression carefully neutral. Across the aisle, my family was a picture of smug confidence. Mark was whispering with their lawyer, occasionally glancing over at me with a smirk. My mother and stepfather sat right behind him, their posture radiating a kind of protective arrogance. They were here to support their son against his hysterical, exaggerating stepsister. I could almost hear the story they'd rehearsed, the narrative they had all agreed upon. For them, the truth was a matter of consensus, not fact. Their lawyer, a man with a cheap suit and an overly loud voice, stood up to begin. He launched into a character assassination disguised as an opening statement, painting me as an emotionally fragile person with a history of exaggeration. He spoke of my quietness as proof of instability, my desire for privacy as a sign of paranoia. I listened to his words, this fiction they had constructed, and felt a strange sense of detachment. He was describing a person I didn't even know. He was fighting a ghost. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, and waited for my turn. I knew my story didn't need to be embellished or defended with emotional appeals. It was already a matter of official record. When he finally finished, Anna stood. She was the complete opposite of him. Calm, precise, and radiating a quiet authority that instantly commanded the room's attention. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," she said, her tone crisp and professional. "The petitioner would like to submit for the record a certified copy of Diplomatic Security Service Incident, Report 77B. Their lawyer immediately shot to his feet. "Objection, irrelevant," he boomed, waving his hand dismissively. "This is a simple family matter, not a federal case." He was trying to keep the battle on his chosen ground of hearsay and personal attacks. He had no idea what was in that binder. The judge, a man who had clearly presided over thousands of these messy disputes, peered over his glasses at the thick sealed document Anna placed on his bench. He ran a finger over the official government seal. His curiosity piqued. "This is highly unusual," he murmured, before looking at their lawyer. "But I'll allow it." Objection overruled. "Let's see what this is." A hush fell over the courtroom as he broke the seal and began to read. I kept my eyes fixed on the judge, watching the subtle shifts in his expression. I saw his eyebrows twitch, then slowly climb his forehead. His lips thinned into a hard line. The longer he read, the more the air of bored routine in the room evaporated, replaced by a palpable electric tension. My family shifted uncomfortably. Mark's smirk had been replaced by a look of nervous confusion. They had expected a shouting match, a he-said-she-said battle of wills. They were not prepared for the silent, methodical weight of a federal investigation. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finally looked up from the report. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to process what he had just read. He cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice was laced with a cold, formal fury that made everyone sit up straighter. He began to read aloud from the report's executive summary. At 2:05 hours, a Level 4 duress protocol was activated by Senior Analyst Raina Jansen. He paused, his eyes finding mine for a brief moment, a flicker of newfound respect in them. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. The title, Senior Analyst, hung in the air, a foreign and impossible concept in their world. The judge continued, his voice growing sterner with every word. Responding Federal Wellness Check Team and local paramedics confirmed a puncture, wound to the left shoulder consistent with a Phillips head screwdriver. Victim was found semi-conscious, having sustained significant blood loss. He looked up from the page, his gaze locking directly onto my stepbrother. He wasn't looking at the charming, misunderstood boy my parents saw. He was looking at a perpetrator. This report, the judge said, his voice now like granite, which includes satellite-verified timestamps, a full transcript of the 911 call made by the responding federal team, and a sworn declaration from Analyst Jansen's commanding officer at the State Department directly contradicts the defendant's entire testimony. It was as if a bomb had gone off in the silence. Mark's face drained of all color, becoming a pasty, sickly white. My stepfather, Gary, was frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open as he stared at me, then back at the judge, as if trying to solve an impossible equation. But it was my mother's reaction that I will never forget. Her face, which had been a mask of defiant pride, completely crumbled. The words senior analyst and duress protocol had shattered her carefully constructed reality. She wasn't looking at her dramatic daughter anymore. She was looking at a stranger, a powerful stranger whose life she had never once bothered to understand. The judge's voice cut through their shock, a final, unassailable verdict. Based on this unimpeachable federal document, I am issuing a permanent restraining order. Furthermore, I am referring this entire case to the district attorney's office with a formal recommendation for felony assault charges. My stepfather had always told Mark he was a born winner. But in a world governed by evidence and protocol, the truth always has the final word. The judge's final words hung in the air, absolute and irreversible. As two bailiffs approached the table to escort a stunned and trembling Mark away, the spell of my family's disbelief finally broke. My mother, her face a mess of tears and confusion, tried to rush towards me, my stepfather right behind her. "Raina, wait!" she cried out, her voice cracking. We need to talk." But before they could get close, my lawyer, Anna, stepped calmly into their path, holding up a single, firm hand. "That's close enough," she stated, her voice leaving no room for argument. They stopped, frozen by a barrier of professional authority they had never encountered before. I didn't turn around. I didn't look at their faces or offer a single word of explanation or absolution. For my entire life, I had been waiting for them to see me, and now that they finally did. I realized I no longer cared about their validation. I simply stood up, smoothed down my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom. In the hallway, leaning against the wall, were two of my colleagues from the agency, including Director Evans. There was no pity in their eyes, no suffocating sympathy. They hadn't come to coddle me. Evans just gave me a short, decisive nod. "Glad you're okay, Raina," he said. "We'll handle the paperwork from here." In my world, that was the highest form of support. Not emotion, but quiet, decisive action. It was everything I had never gotten from the people who were supposed to care the most. 1 year later, the echoes of that courtroom had faded into a distant memory. I stood in front of a glass-walled briefing room, addressing a new team of analysts. On the door, a small, unassuming plaque read, "Raina Jansen, Team Lead, Clandestine Threat Analysis." I had been promoted. I was now in charge of the very unit that monitored the kind of chatter I had once analyzed. My voice was confident, authoritative, as I walked my team through a new intelligence-gathering protocol I had personally developed. A faint, silver scar traced a line on my shoulder, visible just above the collar of my shirt, a permanent reminder not of an injury, but of a decision to stop playing by their rules and to start enforcing my own. After the briefing, my team didn't scatter. They gathered around the central console, asking sharp, intelligent questions, challenging my assumptions, and offering their own insights. We argued, we debated, and we laughed, sharing a dark, gallows humor that only people in our line of work could understand. We spoke a shared language of acronyms and security clearances, a shorthand built on a foundation of mutual respect and proven competence. There was no need for dramatic displays of affection or hollow words of praise. Their respect was evident in the way they listened when I spoke, in the trust they placed in my judgment. This was my family now, a family I hadn't been born into, but one I had earned. A family that saw my ambition not as an inconvenience, but as our greatest asset. Late one evening, as I was finishing a report in my office, an email notification popped up on my personal device. The subject line was stark. "From your mother?" For a moment, I just stared at it. I felt a flicker of the old obligation, the ghost of a daughter's duty. Curiosity, more than anything else, made me click it open. It was a long, rambling message, filled with excuses and self-pity. She wrote about how Mark's life was ruined, how he was a good boy who made one terrible mistake. She wrote about how they had been deceived, how they never understood the pressures I was under, as if my career was something that had happened to them. There was no apology. Not a real one. Just a tangled mess of justifications designed to make herself feel better. A decade ago, a letter like this would have broken my heart. 5 years ago, it would have filled me with rage. But now, I felt nothing. It was like reading a report about a distant incident, an event with no emotional connection to my current reality. I read the final line, where she asked if I could ever find it in my heart to forgive them, and I calmly moved my cursor over the message. I didn't reply. I simply dragged it to the archive folder, a piece of irrelevant data to be filed away. I turned back to the secure monitor on my desk, my focus already shifting to the complex web of threats illuminating a global map. The past was a closed file. The future was my jurisdiction. My family saw me as a footnote in their story, but my work was about protecting the people who write history. They finally fell silent when they realized I was one of them. If you've ever had to use your professional voice to silence the critics in your personal life, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.